Certainly the title is self-explanatory again, but it's good to clarify a few things. Musicians never stop being artists, with creativity being an integral part of their lives, so often changing their style comes natural. Also, it's logical that artists are influenced by different things as they get older and change their lifestyle and views, which is reflected in the music they play. Based on the above, there are many heavy rock bands that have changed their sound during their careers. I will focus on those who did it in the most spectacular and drastic way. Since this is the first video on this topic, I'm talking about bands that are relatively well known or very well known. So, for example, Ulver Pyogenesis or Samargal, although they have undergone incredibly drastic changes in what they play, are excluded. Finally, to make things a bit more varied, I decided to leave out bands that I've covered a lot in other videos, such as Metallica or Def Leppard. If there are any further videos, they might be included. Obviously, every proposal for a possible part 2 will be read and taken into consideration. At the end of each section, I also give my purely personal opinion on whether these style changes are considered successful and help the band on various levels. I repeat, these are purely personal assessments.
There's no swimming in the heavy water, no singing in the acid rain.
They started as a typical hard rock band with their self-titled album in 1974. In the next two albums, both released in 1975, we have the first elements of progressive rock, with songs like By Tor and The Snow Dog, The Necromancer, or The Fountain of Lamneth. In 2112 from 1976, the band made their first major change, fully embracing the progressive rock side, although they retained their heavy dimension. It will continue like this for the next two albums, followed by the trio of releases that will bring us the second major change. Starting with 1980's Permanent Waves, through 1981's Moving Pictures, and ending with 1982's Signals, the song lengths become shorter, the structures simpler, and more synthesizers are gradually introduced into the sound. By the excellent 1984 album, Grace Under Pressure, the sound had become a very clever mix of progressive rock and new wave, a style that will be expanded upon in 1985's Power Windows, where the keyboards will dominate once again. The band will continue this style on their next three albums, although they contained a bit more guitar and sporadic references to their past. The full return to heavy sound will be on their 1993 album, Counterparts, and they will continue in this vein until the end of their discography in 2012, with some minor forays into more alternative paths along the way. Everything they did up until 1984 is considered very successful on all levels. I don't think we can say much. The period from Power Windows, 1985, to Roll the Bones, 1991, received mixed reactions. Still, they continued to be relevant and commercially successful. The last 15 years of their recording career were somewhat quieter once guitars returned to the sound, although criticism appeared again for the Test for Echo and Vapor Trails album duo. However, I believe that this constant change in the genre they played did them a lot of good and is part of their charm and the legacy they left in the broader progressive sound.
Tipping around, keep my brains on the floor.
They started as one of the most original and fresh bands of the rock scene and, why not, of early heavy metal with their first three albums, Queen, Queen 2, and Sheer Heart Attack. In Night at the Opera, we have the first major change that will bring the band's big breakthrough. The sound becomes incredibly eclectic, with the appearance of the most mismatched and diverse styles imaginable, with hard rock making only occasional appearances. By the 1980 album The Game, their sound had transformed into a rather interesting and imaginative pop rock, which seemed to be the logical continuation and evolution of what came before. The massive success of the disco funk track Another One Bites the Dust would bring about the second major change through the album Hot Space, where funk would play a leading role alongside pop rock. The reviews this album received would lead to a retreat towards more straightforward rock forms in the next three albums. where synthpop also had a prominent role. Their last release with Freddie Mercury alive is an unexpected return to heavy rock forms, at a level we hadn't heard since the 70s. The two albums released after the singer's death, I don't think they have a place in our discussion. A quintessentially chameleon-like band that made eclecticism a way of life. Everything they did until 1980 was well-placed, flawlessly executed, original, and deserved its success. Hot space and the emergence of synthpop made a lot of people complain, although today we probably view them with nostalgia rather than malice. The last album they did with Freddie alive in 1991 was unexpectedly stunning. Their first album did what everyone expected. They evolved the Deep Purple sound, removing the blues elements of the Gillan era and the funk soul elements of the Coverdale Hughes era, and moved towards proto-heavy metal. The next album, Rising, will be even more impressive, simply one of the greatest heavy rock albums of all time, laying the foundation for the entire heavy metal edifice of the 1980s. However, the huge success that the band's leader, Ritchie Blackmore, was hoping for wasn't coming. He'll make one more attempt using the neoclassical heavy metal style with the excellent Long Live Rock and Roll. But again, nothing will come of it. This is how changes in members and style will begin. Ronnie James Dio leaves, and the sound initially becomes simpler and more direct on the transitional down to earth. Then Joe Lynn Turner's hired, and in the 3 albums they would make with him, they will propose a form of rock that frequently flirts with both pop rock and AOR. Success in England will come in a spectacular way, but the success in America that the guitarist was so eagerly anticipating will not manifest itself, even after these changes. So, in 1984, he would agree to the Deep Purple reunion, and Rainbow would be a thing of the past. Their last studio effort, 1995's Stranger in Us All, will be an honest attempt to return to hard rock, but it will go unnoticed due to the era in which it was released. The band's first 3 albums are absolute classics and have influenced thousands of musicians in the heavy metal scene. I personally consider the transitional down to earth to be a more than acceptable compromise between what Ritchie had and what he wanted to achieve. The big shift that will come with Turner at that time caused a great stir and received a lot of criticism from the band's core fan base. Commercially, it is considered partially successful, as it produced 4 top 20 singles in England, but only one number 56 in America. Anyway, today, that era definitely has its supporters, who believe that anything with Ritchie's stamp on it is always worth its weight in gold. Originating from the evolution of post-punk gothic rock bands, Southern Death Cult and Death Cult, the Bradford Band were one of the mainstays of the goth scene in the UK in 1983. Their first album, 1984's Dreamtime, would sound more or less as everyone expected. In their second album, 1985's Love, the first hints of a more traditional hard rock sound will begin to appear, blending into their gothic rock. The album will be a huge success in their homeland, and it will also introduce the band to America for the first time. And then Rick Rubin will take over, which will make their sound unrecognizable. Out with the goth, out with the slow tracks, a radical image change with the band, completely altering their musical reference point. Their sound will become a dry, upbeat, catchy hard rock that is influenced by AC/DC, Led Zeppelin, and the Rolling Stones. The success will be huge on the other side of the Atlantic. Its successor, Sonic Temple, will follow the exact same style, although the sound, with Bob Rock producing this time, will be richer in tone. In their 1991 album, Ceremony, they will do more than they need to and give us an overblown sample of their sound that failed in all fronts and knocked them down from their position in the hard rock hierarchy. The rest of their career would yield 5 albums where hard rock would remain, but clearly under a much more alternative dimension. In 2012's Choice of Weapon, they perhaps came closest to replicating the sound of 87 to 89. The biggest surprise will be with their 2022 album, Under the Midnight Sun, where they will complete the cycle and return to post-punk and gothic rock. Their conversion in 1987 was extremely commercially successful, although it was met with negativity from both goths, who accused them of selling out, and rockers, who accused them of being cheap imitators. Of course, they didn't care at all since they became global superstars in the rock music scene. Their journey from 1994 to 2022 is much more interesting, although it appeals to a clearly more limited audience. The demos and single they released under the name Treblinka between 1987 and 1989 placed them in the early black metal scene. However, when they changed their name and started their album discography, they transitioned to death metal, then evolved into death doom metal, and started incorporating the first atmospheric influences on their 1992 album, Clouds. This type of beginnings certainly didn't prepare us for what was to come and the sweeping changes of the next two albums. In Wild Honey, atmospheric influences came to the forefront, along with the elements of Pink Floyd-esque psychedelia, to the point where we can talk about one of the landmark albums for the then newly formed gothic metal. In their 1997 album, A Deeper Kind of Slumber, the band underwent another major change, retaining a bit of psychedelia and a lot of gothic, almost completely eliminating metal, thus giving us a pure goth album. They weren't the only ones to do this, nor the first, but it was still a huge surprise at the time. Their subsequent trajectory will remain firmly anchored in gothic rock and gothic metal, with the latter surpassing the former in their last three albums, up to and including 2012's The Scarred People. The changes in the first part of their career were considered a logical evolution of their sound. The huge leaps between 1994 and 1997 really shocked a lot of people, especially since Wild Honey had made such a positive impression. So many people wondered why this new change in 1997. Anyway, their transition to gothic rock brought them a significant level of success, especially in Germany, where the genre has always been popular. Although I like all their eras, I don't know if that final shift was ultimately worth it, at least in terms of the legacy they left behind.
Without frustration, with no master plan.
Perhaps one of the most well-known cases of style change in the metal scene. They started in 1989, practically inventing the death doom metal genre. In their 1990 album Gothic, they incorporated gothic elements into their sound for the first time with the song Eternal. The sound evolved further in the next two albums, towards something increasingly more atmospheric. They themselves admitted that they invented the term gothic metal, based on the metal subgenres that were flourishing in the early 90s. And not only that, but they will also give us one of the best examples of the genre with Draconian Times in 1995. And then, the big change will begin. 1997's 1 Second probably owes more to Depeche Mode than to Metallica, but at least it has guitars. In the 1999 album Host, the big shock will come, with the guitars disappearing completely and the band playing pure electronic pop. There will be some guitars on their 2001 album, Believe in Nothing, but things will be muddled due to the mediocre production. From there on, they will do something unique in heavy rock history. They will begin to head back to where they started. First came gothic metal with the next two albums, and then the closer and closer approach to the sound they had in 90 to 93 with each new album. Perhaps their heaviest period will be that of albums The Plague Within and Medusa, 2015 and 2017 respectively, while their last two albums constantly alternate between doom death and gothic metal. The changes they made and the risks they took from 1989 to 1995 were simply unique for the genre they belonged to and influenced hundreds of musicians who built incredibly successful careers by copying their sound. After that, they might have taken things a bit too far, also causing commercial damage to their careers, as a metalhead in 1999 was forbidden from listening to something like Host. I consider their comeback to be more authentic than that of other metal giants. But for me personally, it would have been better if they had continued to take a few more risks. Their first album, Always, 1992, was groundbreaking because it introduced the so-called Beauty and the Beast vocals, which is the combination of male death metal growls and female clean ethereal singing. In the second, Almost a Dance, we have a first, rather clumsy attempt at gothic metal. The arrival of Anneke van Giersbergen's incredible voice in 1994 would bring the two albums for which they are still known today. Mandy Lion from 1995 and Nighttime Birds from 1997, where we have an excellent blend of progressive metal and gothic metal. The band continued to evolve, and in their next two albums, they significantly reduced the metal elements, giving us an excellent blend of art rock and progressive rock with touches of space rock and trip hop. This last style will make its presence even more felt in 2003's Souvenirs. Their style will then transform into simple alternative rock on their 2006 album Home, after which Anneke will leave. They will make 3 more albums in which they maintain a steady art rock / alternative rock direction, but also incorporate elements of dream pop. It's impressive how a band that hasn't played metal since 1998 had, at least until Anneke left, a core of mostly metal fans. Logically, the first grumbling started when they left metal behind, turned into griping when trip-hop dominated Souvenirs, and into disappointment with Home. Anyway, personally, I consider the risks they took and the changes they made to be an indication of an unwavering character and an extremely ambitious vision. It would have been very easy for them to keep playing the same thing throughout their entire career. It didn't help them commercially, but every bold move has its price.
Have I really lost control?
1993's Serenades was an excellent example of Paradise Lost-style death doom metal, with one gothic track, Sleepless, standing out and indicating their future direction, as we all thought at the time. Except things here developed much faster than we expected. In 1995's The Silent Enigma, there was the evolution we were being prepared for, with equal measures of heaviness and atmosphere. In 1997's Eternity, we had gothic metal, while understanding that these guys really like Pink Floyd. And in 1998's Alternative 4, their journey into metal came to an end, along with the band's classic logo. From then on, they released 9 albums, which featured a mix of Floyd-esque progressive rock, alternative rock, art rock, and toward the end, elements of classical music, post-rock, or even electronic music. That journey will end with their dissolution in 2020. Unlike their Halifax compatriots, they never returned to metal, not even in the form of a tribute, an EP, or a special release. Their foray into heavy rock lasted only 5 years and 4 albums, but it was enough to give them a significant core of fans. The huge change they made afterward was probably accepted by the metal audience, but based on their reputation up to that point, and even their name itself, it might have hurt them commercially, as I don't think they ever managed to cross over to the alternative or art rock audience. Their fans were mostly open-minded metalheads. No one knows what would have happened if they had built a path based on metal, but if that's what they felt doing at the time, then good for them.
Further deeper, I know you're out to try me. I'm not in this.
They are considered among the main inventors of melodic death metal, as well as the main exponents of what we would call the Gothenburg sound. The 4 albums they released from 1996 to 2000, The Jester Race, Waracle, Colony, Clayman, are cornerstones of this sound. But somewhere along the way, things took an unexpected turn, And in fact, this wasn't caused by a change in members. No, it was the same people. Starting with 2002's Reroute to Remain, we began to see the first hints of alternative metal in their sound, which by the time we reached 2008's A Sense of Purpose, had completely overtaken Melodeath. Indeed, in the 2010s, the many electronic elements we were hearing made us categorize them even as melodic metalcore. An attempt to return to their roots will be made on their latest album, Foregone, released in 2023. I think they're the only band in this video whose changes leave a completely bittersweet taste. They certainly helped them commercially as they were constantly on the rise in sales, at least until 2008, especially in the United States. On the other hand, however, they faced constant grumbling and criticism from the critical mass of fans they had gathered with their first 4 or even 5 albums. Many people started speaking more and more disparagingly about them, even more so because of their stubbornness in not changing the course they had charted and even expanding it. Personally, they lost me after 2004's Soundtrack to Your Escape, so I'm definitely on the side of the complainers. Although I still commend them for taking risks, I will always wonder if their stubbornness and persistence truly paid off. Their debut album, Dance of December Souls, from 1993, was another, the third in this video, proof of excellent death doom metal with gothic metal elements. A bit more accessible, but essentially in similar waters, will be its successor, the excellent Brave Murder Day from 1996. And then the changes will begin in earnest. Initially, it was gothic metal with The Discouraged Ones and Tonight's Decision. Then a very distinctive, almost depressing alternative rock in their 2001 album, Last Fair Deal Gone Down. And finally, a clear alternative metal in their 2003 released Viva Emptiness. In 2006, they will release what I consider their artistic peak and their first major commercial success, Great Cold Distance, where they will give us a synthesis of everything that came before, although the weight falls more on their alternative side. Their next 2 albums would follow a similar path, capitalizing on the momentum they had built, with 2012's Dead End Kings becoming their commercial peak. The evolution of their sound over their last 4 albums will practically only bring one new dimension, that of progressive metal. Their first 2 albums are considered gems of the broader death doom gothic metal sound. The next 7 albums, which saw their sound venture into many new directions, were completely accepted by the wider metal audience, who had always shown them a particular fondness with only the strange Last Fair Deal Gone Down, causing some confusion due to its excessive shift toward alternative. The style they played on each album always had its own distinct identity, without borrowing anything from other gothic or alternative metal bands. I think the melancholy and general pessimism that these albums conveyed fit perfectly with the spirit of the times and made the band beloved by many people. However, in the last 4 albums, I feel that the whole thing has become somewhat tiresome for the audience, who, having become accustomed to a band that is constantly evolving, seems rather unimpressed by what we could even call stagnation in their sound. Still, I believe the major changes of the 90s were completely successful for them at all levels.